Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Radial live stream Tech Corner. Today we have myself. My name is Ben. I'm just on the marketing team. And then we have Ryan, Mike, and Austin, who are part of the tech team here at Radial. So these are the guys that answer all of your questions over emails, as well are involved with some of our product designs. So today we just wanted to talk about reamping, answer any questions that you guys have. And then we're also doing a giveaway at the end of this as well. So we're going to give away a Reamp kit. So hopefully you learn something and then you get a chance to try this at home yourself. So thanks, guys, for joining us. I'm excited to get into this one. So first, maybe we'll just start with Mike. Mike, if you can just give us a quick overview of what reamping is and how you do it, and then we'll go deeper from there.
For sure. So what reamping is it's a special technique that's used in the recording and mixing process. What it allows you to do, which is really cool, is you can take any pre-recorded track, be it guitar, bass, even vocals or drums, and it allows you to send this signal through your pedal effects and your amplifiers and re-record it. What this can do is this can open up a lot of creative possibilities. It also allows you to maybe correct for things that you didn't think you got right the first pass through, and can be really cool. So while it can have this powerful effect on your mixes, it's actually pretty easy to implement. We describe it in 2 steps. So yeah, here's our first step. So this is recording a clean guitar signal. So what you're going to want to use for this is a typical DI box. So what this does is the DI splits your signal, where one half of it feeds your amplifier, so you can still record your amp as usual and the guitar player can hear themselves. The other half takes a clean signal directly to your interface, hence direct box. So this is going to give you that clean guitar signal that you can use later on for reamping. So the second step, you bring out your reamper here, and what you're going to do with this is you're going to send signal from your audio interface to the reamper. It's going to convert the signal back down so that you can send it through your pedals and your amplifiers, and then you can re-record the signal back into your interface. So that's reamping in a nutshell.
Yeah, awesome. Who typically reamps? Is this just for home guys or bigger studios? Because I know, Mike, you've worked in studios for a while. So how have you seen it used, and how popular do you think it is?
It's really popular. You see people using it definitely in home studios, but the pros use this too. Big recording studios use this all the time. One session that I was on that actually demonstrates this isn't just for guitar heavy music. It's not just for rock or metal. I was on a jazz recording and mix session where we used reamping in a really cool and unique way. And what we did was we took a solo saxophone and we sent that through an amplifier that was underneath the grand piano. The amp was facing up towards the soundboard, and we had the pedal down so the strings would resonate. So we played this song, this tune back through with microphones picking it up. And I won't forget it because it was just such an ethereal, strange sound. It was really unique. And it was a cool way that you could just use reamping to create an effect. So,
yeah, no, that's great. And that's something we wanted to talk with everyone about as well. Is reamping is great for dialing in your tone, but it's also just creates all these other opportunities just to be creative and play around with sounds. So just wanted to also mention, if you guys have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat and we'll try to get to some of them. These guys, our tech team will also be available afterwards that we'll share the email address. So you can just reach out to them. Yeah, so that's just a quick snippet of reamping, but it does go back quite a ways because this was used in studios for quite a long time. Ryan, can you kind of give us a bit of the brief history of where Reamp originated?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ben. I guess it's interesting because today we talk a lot about being creative, like Mike said. But in reality, the Reamp was kind of born into the audio engineering world from not necessarily a mistake, but an unusable recording. Back in about 1993, mixing engineer, producer, mastering engineer John Cuniberti was working on Joe Satriani's Time Machine album, which was a 2-disc set. And the first disc was recorded in the studio, with the second disc being recordings from live performances. And what happened was, when going back to the studio with these live tracks, John found that the bass mic on the amplifier was not really usable. It was noisy, and not something that would go onto an album. Luckily, John had recorded a DI track, so he had that clean track available to him. The thing about when you're mixing and producing a live set is you still want it to sound live, obviously. So the DI track wasn't necessarily something that that translated that for him, not what he wanted to hear in the mix. So he had that DI track. Now this was recorded on a studio machine. So what he thought about doing was getting that signal back into an amplifier in the studio. So rather than having Stu Ham, who played bass on the album, and the live, the live performances, come back and re-record, John thought that this was unnecessary and that there would be a way to get that signal from the tape machine into a bass amp. The problem with this is that the output from a tape machine, or now a DAW, is usually about +4 line level. So that's extremely more powerful than your bass or guitar signal plugging into an amplifier, and that's going to overload the input of your amp, and you're going to get an unusable recording again. So John went to a tech by the name of James Gangwer and said, hey, I've got this idea. I need to take the +4 line level out of the tape machine and get it back into this bass amp, but we need to match the signal somehow. So the two of them worked on this and figured out a way with using an audio transformer, which is the simplest way to do it, in order to convert that +4 dB balanced line level to a usable instrument type signal that could be plugged into an amplifier. So that's very cool. So that all happened in about 1993. So obviously, a little inside that some of those bass tones that you hear on that album were in fact reamped, and the first reamp tracks that were really documented to be used with a device. Fast forward, John started giving these things away to building them and giving them away to different engineers throughout the industry, and they became more popular, and then they started to become popular amongst the project musician and engineer. So John and his friends would get around, and on a Saturday afternoon, the story goes, and he would build 50 or 100 Reampers, and then he would sell them to more and more people. As John got busier, as this technique became more of a, let's be creative, we can have somebody come in, play with one amp, record their stuff, and then we can reamp after the fact without having to have the musician there. He outsourced to a company in Indiana, I believe it was, to manufacture these for him. All the meantime, he applied for a patent. So this was a patented design. Radial engineering in the later mid 2000s, I believe, later 2000s, started to build our Pro RMP box, which we kindly issued labeled the patent on the box so that people knew that this was a design by somebody else. And we were started to sell them more and more. In reality, things start to break, and John is a mixing engineer at heart, so he was getting these things back, fixing them, and he wanted to kind of get back into his passion. So we approached in about 2010 to John and said, hey, can we purchase the Reamp brand name and the patent and everything, and kind of pay homage to you by making a JCR version, which will keep your initial design and your sound, and also we can make other products based on the Reamp brand, which is very cool. So in 2011 at the NAMM show, basically was announced that this would happen, and we still make the JCR today, 10 years later. So this is 28 years of reamping, and we make a number of other reamp products, some that are designed for specifically just using guitar pedals, and then of course intermediate level like our Pro RMP, and then other ones like 500 series reamp. So right now, today, we ship about 7,000 Reampers a year. So it wasn't always like that, but we thank John for such a cool idea that we could run with and bring to the masses.
Yeah, no, that's great. And as many of you know too, like with Radial, we have like 100 different boxes to do almost any application. And with Reamp 2, we're going to kind of go into why we have a few different Reamp boxes, even though they typically all are doing the same application, but there's just some other features. So we'll get more into that. So thanks for the background, Ryan, because that kind of helps build where we are now and where we're going in the future with Reamp. Mike, I think the next thing that would be good too to talk about is a bit more of the details of why a Reamp box is required when you're recording. I know Ryan went into it a little bit, but just to further get all the details, and then we'll go into later, we'll go into Austin with how you actually connect and set up and use a Reamp box. But Mike, if you can kind of go from there.
For sure. Yeah, this is a common question we get. Once people find out about reamping and they want to get into it, they ask, well, why is a special box required to make this happen? The reason for that is that most pro audio devices, such as mixers and audio interfaces, those operate at line level, so around plus 4 dB. They use balanced signals like XLRs and TRS connectors, and they operate at low impedance. As guitar players know, most of these instruments, pedals, and amps, they're a little bit different in that they operate at instrument level, which is much lower. They use high impedance signals, and they use unbalanced connections. So as a guitar player knows on stage, you have to use a direct box to connect to the PA. Going in reverse, you need a Reamp box. So what it really is a converter box. So it takes the line level signal, knocks it down to instrument level, takes low impedance and bumps it up to high impedance, and it connects it from an unbalanced source to, a balanced source to an unbalanced source.
Right. And we did have a question that came in earlier, but how is that different than just using a direct box and plugging it in reverse? How is a Reamp box different?
Right. Yeah, it kind of intuitively it feels like it should work that way because a direct box works when you go from instrument level to pro audio level. But in reality, when you work in reverse, the direct box isn't actually able to knock the signal level down. So one issue that can cause is that on your audio interface, you'd really have to pull down on the fader in your DAW to get a usable signal that won't overload your guitar inputs. The problem with that is that your audio interface has a noise floor, and it's designed to send signals out a ways above this noise floor. But as you bring down that fader, you get closer and closer to that. So you're going to have more noise on your signal. So that's one of the reasons why you wouldn't use a direct box in between the two.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's great. Thanks. Austin, I'm just reading through the chat here, and I think we're going to answer a couple of these questions as you go, but I might pull out a couple of questions. Can you go into a little bit more detail of how you connect between, first capturing the DI track and then going into an actual Reamp device and some of those extra steps?
Yeah, of course. More than happy to. So as we've already talked about so far with what Mike and Ryan have talked about, reamping is essentially a two-stage process where you start by capturing a dry, unprocessed tone. In a usual sense, we're looking at either something like a guitar or a bass, but that can be, you can use a Reamp box with a bunch of other different sources, and we'll get into that later. So just in terms of our first step, it's basically what you see here in this diagram here. So we're basically taking a guitar, capturing it using a DI box and running it into the mic input on, say, an audio interface or maybe any sort of outboard mic preamp you have. While you're reamping, you might want to just record, a stage amp, or pardon me, just any sort of amp in the studio as a scratch track, for example, just so you have something for reference, and so the musician has something to actually listen to while they play back. So in that case, you can just take the through output of the DI box and run it into the amp as you see there. So once you do that, you can basically start by just capturing your the takes that you want, and then from there you can sort of get your comped super take, as they say at that point. So once you sort of have your finished DI track ready to go, you have the exact take that you want. Everything sounds perfect. At this point, that's where we start getting into the reamping stage. So again, as we've previously stated, Reamping is basically taking a balanced plus 4 dB line level signal and dropping it down to nominally an instrument level signal for connection to an amp, as again in a classical sense. So in this case, when you're doing this, you're going to want to utilize one of the line outputs on your interface for this type of connection. So here in this diagram, we're just using an Apollo twin. Just very common, very commonly used. So for example, here we're using line out 3 on the Apollo twin, and we are connecting it to the input of our X amp here, which is just an XLR connection. The majority of our Reamp boxes do use XLR connections. We do have a couple that utilize TRS inputs as well. So in this case, what you're going to want to do is make sure that when you're connecting from the interface to the Reamp box, you want to make sure that it is the longer of your 2 connections. So with the other one being the connection from the Reamp box to your amp. This will just help make sure that you're reducing the amount of unbalanced cabling you're using, helps prevent any sort of noise from excess noise from incurring in your signal path. So definitely make sure that your balanced connection here is the longer of the 2. That's definitely a key thing to think about. So once you are connected to the Reamp box, from there, we make the connection to the amp. So with the X amp here, we do have, this does actually have 2 separate instrument outputs, so you can connect to 2 different amps if need be. But in this case, we're just going to connect to a single one. In this case, just to keep it simple. So you can just do that using standard 1/4-inch patch cables that you normally use to connect your guitar to, say, your pedal board or directly to your amp. In that case, if you want to use any pedals between the Reamp box and the amp, you can definitely feed the output of the Reamp box into your pedals as well and have that sit in between, whatever works best in that sense. So once you have everything connected in this sense, this is where we start getting into a bit more of the physical preparation for recording. So in this sense, as you can see here, we have an SM57, mounted up on a wonderful invisible boom stand, connecting directly to the XLR mic input on the Apollo twin. So this is, of course, along with any other mics you may want to use, is what will be used to capture the signal. So at this point, that's pretty much the entirety of the physical setup you have to worry about connecting. So the next thing to note when you're reamping is, first of all, your DAW and interface settings are super important in this sense. So when you're setting up your dry track to reamp, what you're going to want to do is basically go to the I/O settings for your dry DI track and make sure that the output of that track, instead of being it's normally sent to, say, your submix or your monitor outputs, you're going to want to make sure that the output is set to the line output that you are connecting your Reamp box to. So again, in this case with the Apollo twin, you will basically go into your DAW settings and make sure you pick line 3 or line out 3, and that will make sure that the dry track goes directly through that output only. So once you do that, you start by basically feeding that signal to the input of the Reamp box. And then once you have that set up, you can basically just create all your all the new blank audio tracks that you want to use to record the Reamp signals. So for whatever mics you have connected, obviously you're going to want to record a track for each of those. Another thing to keep in mind with your DAW setup is you need to keep the channel fader for your dry track set to a relatively high level because it might not seem like it necessarily, but that actual channel fader track in your in your DAW will be directly responsible for the amount of signal that your Reamp box sees. So you want to make sure that you keep that at a higher level. If you find you have to push the fader above 0 dB, that's okay. As long as the signal isn't clipping, that's not a problem. So once you get that going, the last thing to check is just make sure that the line outputs on your interface are set to +4 dB. Certain interfaces, again, such as the Apollo twin, they have the ability to actually configure your line outs to either a +4 dBu line level or a -10 dBV consumer level. So -10 dBV will be a lot lower. So you want to make sure you set it to +4 dBu so that you get the best signal to noise ratio and so that you're driving the Reamp box properly.
Yeah.
So once we have this all set up, we get to the actual process of reamping. So at this point, what you're going to want to do, go to your Reamp box, and you're going to want to turn that level control fully counterclockwise. Turn it fully off. And at this point, this is when you can start, you can take your amp off of standby, and you can actually start dialing things in. So at this point, it'll be best to start playing back the dry track and slowly turning up the level control on the Reamp box until you get to your desired level. At this point, you probably are wondering what's the best point to actually, what is the sort of the sweet spot for setting the level control on the Reamp box. In this sense, we typically recommend that you maybe beforehand, before you sort of connect the Reamp box and everything together, just quickly plug a guitar into an amp and just strum it a little bit so you get an idea as to how the guitar itself would drive it. So then that way you can match the signal level in that sort of sense, whether it be audibly or through just the metering within your DAW itself, either of which will work fine. So once you basically get the level set to the amount of input you want to be driving the amp with, even if you want to drive a little bit harder than you might typically would, really push the preamp end of the amp, you can totally do that. And once you have that done, basically set the, make sure you get all the input levels for your mics and mic preamps set. And then by there, you just, you hit record and you go. And then, then if you've done everything right, you have an awesome sounding reamp signal that you can tweak to your absolute delight.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Austin. And I know there's a lot of things to unpack there. And I see we answered a couple questions that came in earlier. But just maybe just to recap, because I know we talked about a lot of things. The question here that covers up Mike Bauer's face, but generally, what level should the signal be when being sent to the amp? Like you just said, that's something that you're going to have to play around with a little bit, but as long as the output of the whatever interface you're using is at +4 and you're driving that signal before it's clipping, I think you covered that, so that's great. One question we had that came in too that I think is kind of interesting to bring up, and it doesn't, maybe I'll let Mike Bauer answer this one because, well, actually, you're going to get covered as I put this question up. But this is a question from one of our guys here, and he's worrying about latency. And this doesn't so much come into play with reamping, but could you just maybe answer why you're not going to run into any latency issues if you're reamping outside of typical latency DAW dependent problems?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for the question, Stowe Zone. Yeah, this is kind of the same problem that you'd run into if you went into any piece of outboard gear while you're mixing. So you are going to have the latency doing the digital to analog conversion and then back again. Most of the time, this is so minimal that you don't need to do anything other than have delay compensation on. Or as you say, you can look at the waves and nudge the tracks afterwards. I think the benefits that you get from reamping kind of outweigh the costs of having to do that small adjustment afterwards. But there isn't really a way to get around it because you do have to get from the digital world into the analog world and back again, unless, of course, you're recording on a studio tape machine, in which case you don't have to worry about it. But I don't even think that the guys Ryan mentioned earlier are still using those, so probably not a factor.
Okay. No, awesome. Thanks. Yeah, and just keep bringing in the questions here, guys. If there's something that maybe you missed or if you want more clarification on, we'll definitely try to get to all these questions here. So that's great. So Austin went through the setup and how you plug in your Reamp box and a bit of the workflow. One thing that Austin brought up too is we're talking a lot about guitar DI tracks and those things, but there are other options for recording any wave file back through effects pedals. So we have other products for that as well. So maybe Ryan, do you want to kind of cover the other types of reampers that we have and just a brief overview, maybe answer like who would want some of the different devices that we have if you're just looking to start into reamping. I'll let you kind of get into that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sure. There's like the DI world, we have active and passive reampers. So starting with the little blue box there, we've got the Pro RMP, and that's a passive unit, as well as the black Reamp JCR. Those two units are passive. So those are really easy to deal with in the way that you don't need to run power or anything like that. It's essentially one input coming from your DAW and one output to go to the guitar amp. These employ audio transformers, which we know and love to use. So they provide galvanic isolation, so you're not going to get any hum and buzz issues when connecting your setup, and they just simply work well. The Pro RMP is kind of your entry level passive unit, very basic, uses a custom transformer that we had designed for us, very usable. And then you can go to something like the JCR, which is that John Cunaberti design with a few extra features like the filter on it. But it's that original sound. So you're going to get a little bit more, lower mid definition on the something like the JCR, but it's something that's going to be used, maybe outside the project studio. Think that. So when driving one single amp, passive reamper is going to work just fine. Now, when we get into a situation where we want to drive multiple amps, say 2 or more, we can look at something like either the Radial X amp, which will allow you to drive 2 amplifiers at once and is transformer isolated on one of the outputs. So if you do have hum and buzz caused by ground loops, you're still protected there with an audio transformer. And basically the Reamp is powered by an external power supply. So you do need to have power, but of course, because it's going to be close to your amplifier, there should be power readily available there. And we also have something called the JD7, which we may or may not have a slide for, but that has 1 input and 7 outputs. So if you need to drive up to 7 guitar amplifiers simultaneously with a line level signal, you could use something like the JD7. Then we have a little bit of kind of a specialized thing. So what people used to do is they would take a Reamp box. So say they didn't have an amplifier to use, or they were in an apartment or something like that, and they couldn't play at all hours of the day, or ever even play really as loud as they wanted to, or reamp as loud as they wanted to. What we designed is, what people would do is they would take their Reamp box, plug into their pedals, and then they would go into a DI box at the end of the pedals to go back into the audio interface at mic level. So what we thought, well, what's an easier way to do this? Why not make one device that does the whole round trip? So that's the EXTC. So we have the EXTC stereo for stereo pedals, and then the 500 series module for 500 series racks. So what this allows you to do is come out +4 from your interface, go in through a series 1 or a series of guitar pedals, and then back into the EXTC receive jack, and then +4 directly back into the interface. So there's no mic preamps or anything involved. You're simply using the line input and line output from your interface and making a round trip through guitar pedals. And one of the cool things about this is the blend feature. So you can do some parallel processing. So if you're trying to, maintain some of the fundamentals and things like that, because those can, effects pedals, especially when you're using vintage stuff, can get pretty crazy. So if you want to still maintain some of that, the dry signal track, you can do that with the blend feature. So these are very cool products, more specialized to, people that are doing sound design use these quite a bit, because you can take any track, really, any track that you've pre-recorded, and send it through guitar pedals. And vintage guitar pedals work with this. There's polarity reverse, so some older pedals might have an issue where they invert the phase at the output, or through their circuit. So this allows you to correct that and line things up and just get really creative. So these are some of the cooler devices that are a little bit more recent and extremely popular as well, and all very, very orange.
Yeah, we also had a question here. Just the Ecstasy line, can you use that as just a regular Reamp box? Ryan, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, absolutely. If you like to, yes, you can. So if you want a dual purpose a Reamper, you can use simply the front half of the EXTC. So you would go from your interface and then just out to pedals, and then to a guitar amp, or just directly to the guitar amp. And then you have a send, and you don't have to use the receive portion of the EXTC. So yes, the answer is yes.
Awesome. Oh, that's great. Thanks. Also, I wanted to mention we have a video and sound clips available, and I'll post that in the description later, where you can actually hear the differences between all our Reamp boxes. So like we said, there's different transformers that are used and slightly different circuits. So that's going to just play into just the overall character or color that you're getting through the Reamp box. So that's available just to kind of hear the differences. And just a side note too, some videos that might compare different Reamp boxes. There's, like Austin was going through, there's a lot of steps in how you get your finished result, just so based on signal level or how the original track was first captured. So sometimes comparing apples to apples isn't always really true. But with our sound clips that we developed, it's all through the exact same system, all done at once. You can really hear just the true character of each Reamp box. Yeah, so we definitely covered a lot of things. So we've covered a bit of just basics, what reamping is, who uses Reamp, where it started from, and then the process of how you actually do it. Austin, just maybe if you can kind of close us off here with just some final thoughts, some questions you've heard from customers over the years, or just anything else around reamping.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like the fact how we just kind of touched on, like the history of reamping, where it came from and where it currently is. But I think a good thing to touch on here when it comes to reamping is like hear me out on this. It's about where reamping is going. And the best part about that is it's truly up to whoever's using it. So on a surface level, reamping can seem very technical, very clinical. Just like I said, just at a surface level. But at the end of the day, once you have the ability to do this type of signal conversion, the world really is your oyster. So even if you want to do something like, for example, if you have your dry DI track in your DAW and you want to maybe try EQing it a bit, bumping up the low mids for a bit more low end presence, or even compressing the track before you reamp it, like you can do that. There's no real wrong answers with doing this. And at that point, you can even go beyond the concept of even just reamping guitars. A common studio trick that a lot of engineers have used in the past is, say, if they don't have a very good, or maybe they don't have a snare bottom mic to mix with on drums at all. I've definitely heard of a lot of engineers who will basically reamp the snare drum track out to a guitar amp, and they will basically place the snare drum right above the speaker on the amp and basically stick up mics onto the bottom of that snare drum. And they'll basically just reamp and re-record that snare bottom track, as if it was there the entire time. And that way you can really dial in what you want. So, and at the end of the day, it doesn't even also have to stop there. When it comes to things like the EXTC and the EXTC stereo, you can really start to play around with a crazy amount of boutique and designer pedals that are out there these days. As all of the guitar players will know, the options are nearly endless with guitar pedals. So, if you want to try placing, like your Red Panda particle on a vocal, for example, or that's probably a little too niche, but, or, or even, taking your keyboard track and running it back through a Strymon Big Sky, like, those are very basic surface level things, but you can basically make use of your new or even your old pedal collection and create new and interesting sounds that, might have a bit more of a tactile and visceral feeling when they're physically in front of you in comparison to using plugins. A lot of people work differently, and a lot of people like twisting knobs. So, if you might do that with your guitar rig, why not do that with your productions as well? You don't have to just dial mic preamps or compressors. You can dial in your guitar pedals to get great sounds as well. And like I said, the options are truly endless. I could go on all day, but at the end of the day, the power is in your hands, and you have the ability to make your recording stand out and be different with the power of reamping. So I think that's probably, I think I'll end it at that point, but just some words of confidence, and just to let you know that freedom is out there and you can find it.
That's awesome. Thanks, Austin. Well, that's it for Tech Corner for today. We did want to also have a giveaway here for you guys so that you could have a chance to get started with reamping. So today we're going to be giving away a Reamp kit that will start the giveaway today, and this will go for the rest of the week. So the best way to enter to win, here, I got to do a couple things to make this happen. So you can enter to win by going to radialeng.com/win and just sign up with your email address. And then there's a bonus entry if you answer the question for what Reamp box is best suited for reamping effects pedals. So feel free to go there. We'll be posting this link for the next week as well on social media. So feel free, if you guys like what we're doing here, let us know. Follow us on social media. We'll be posting more updates when we're doing these in the future. And just share in the chat or in the comments, how do you like to reamp? What's something that's cool that you've done? Really, like we've been saying, reamping is really about just creating some creative ideas and just having fun with sound. So thanks for joining us. Thank you, tech team. If you do want to reach out to these tech guys, you can email us at support@radialeng.com. They can help you set up your Reamp system or whatever you're trying to do in your home studio there. But yeah, thank you for joining us. We're really excited to be doing this, and we'll talk to you guys all later.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
See you. Bye.